good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. The show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon, USA area of the country. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about. And the title of tonight's show will give you some idea where it's going to be going. It's a social justice take on the 2016 election, and Dr. Martin Donohoe, who's been on my show 1,000 times, because he's just so delightful and so smart. And good to have you on again.
Thanks. You sound like my agent.
I am. So we have a whole list of questions to prompt the conversation, exchange back and forth. And because you're so knowledgeable about so much of the stuff, you will be doing most of the talking, I think, as I prompt you with some questions.
Sure.
And we're going to have an abbreviated bio segment. The show usually goes in 2 segments. Usually the first half of the show is taken up with me talking to my guests about who they are personally, so that the viewers have an idea where you're coming from. But you've been on so many times, and I'm sure my viewers have seen you before, so we'll ask just a few questions about who you are. And we'll let you do that on your own hook, and then if you miss something that I wanted to know about, why, I'll ask you that question anyhow. So, and how are you feeling right now?
Oh, I'm feeling great in some ways, although it's sort of a perverse pleasure to be here, because I wish I didn't have to be talking about what we're going to talk about tonight. Yeah. This is election is making a mockery of democracy.
Mm-hmm. You will say what that means later on.
Sure.
Okay. And I'm feeling pretty good. I got a new printer for my computer because that was driving me nuts for days and days. I was trying to save money, but finally I gave in and got one this morning, so I stopped worrying about that. And there's some other things going on that are pretty positive, but I'm looking for things that are positive that make me feel good to make up for the result of tonight's debate. I'm sure it's going to be disappointing. I'm not sure. Anyhow, let's keep going.
And we should clarify it's taking place as we speak.
As we speak.
So I'm sure there'll be a lot of fireworks, and I'll look forward to watching it on tape delay.
So, trick question or two anyhow?
Sure.
If I ask your best friend, who is Martin? Be your best friend and say, pretend that you're talking about Martin. Martin is what?
Well, my best friends are my 2 brothers. So
what would one of them say about you?
Hopefully they'd say I was a decent, honest fellow and a good dad and a good son and a good brother.
They both say that?
Most days.
I like your modesty, okay. And so from the top of your head, talk about who you are personally so the viewers have an idea.
Sure. So I'm a physician, and I practice internal medicine part-time. And I also have a great interest in public health and social justice, as well as in the medical humanities. That is, using the works of great authors, both physicians and non-physicians, as a form of pedagogy to teach medical and public health students about the social and the cultural and the economic and the environmental contributors to health and to illness. And so in addition to my work practicing medicine, I maintain the Public Health and Social Justice website, where I have approximately 75 open access PowerPoint slide presentations that anyone can feel free with appropriate citation to use, covering a variety of topics.
75.
It's really a labor of love because, of course, I get paid nothing for doing it, and it probably takes about 10 hours a week to keep them constantly updated, and they range in length from 70 slides to, hold your breath, 800 slides.
When do you ever sleep?
Not much, but that's who I am professionally. Really, what's more important and most important in my life now is I'm a father to a just wonderful, almost 3-year-old little girl whom you'll meet later. And
she's the Dawn, this 3-year-old.
I am having so much fun. It's as if I just won the child lottery. She is the sweetest, kindest, most empathetic, smart, just fun kid, but she's just a nice, affectionate kid to be around. I really feel like I won the child lottery.
Yeah, so you're going to get in the lottery, you're going to get a mother for Maddie?
Well, that's a long-term goal. I'm trying, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what else can I ask you? Why were you born?
Why?
Why does someone always...
Well, my parents had intercourse.
Any other reason?
And fortunately, my mom chose not to terminate. But I guess I'm giving a more scientific answer. Why was I born?
I don't want that now.
I think I was the product of a tremendous love of two people who really wanted to have children, and who I idolize. My father passed away in 1989. My mother is here tonight, and you'll meet her. But the self-sacrifice and the love that they gave and the wisdom that they imparted and the way they taught my brothers and me to be close to each other and to support each other is something that if I can do a third as well as they did, I'll feel like I was a success in life. So I think that's why I was born. It's just two people who really said we would like to bring other individuals in the world to share our love with and to hopefully make the world a better place.
Mm-hmm.
Time will tell how well I'm doing.
I want to remind you again that you're not talking to a bunch of professionals like you're talking to a bunch of ordinary viewers. And you don't usually go wandering off too far, technically, so just be conversational.
Sure.
But
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people watching who are a lot smarter than I am in areas. We all have our little areas of quasi-expertise, and so I'll do my best to stick to the facts.
You do fine.
As opposed to what's going on today in the world.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to go any more into this part, so let's...
Sure, we can just dive into
the questions, okay? And then
Sure.
we'll take a break somewhere along the way. You mentioned the presidential debate, the third one, and I guess you got a lot of thoughts about that.
I do. I'm amazed that in a country of 320 million people that the two best candidates we could come up with are the two that are running. It's disheartening, it's disconcerting, and I was a big Sanders supporter. In fact, I've been a member of the Green Party for many years because if I look at their platform, which I would ask people to do, it's basically a platform that is very democratic, that is geared towards social justice, towards health care for all, towards improvements in the criminal justice system, attacking environmental degradation and promoting clean energy, using science and respecting education and funding education completely. And unfortunately, Sanders lost. I think he was marginalized by the media. I think he made some mistakes early on in the debates and in his news conferences, but I admire his tenacity, I admire his passion, and my hope is that not only will his followers, many of whom are young people, continue to carry the torch for him and for his ideas, not just to move the Democratic Party to the left, because that's difficult to do. They have many entrenched special interests, and with the amount of money in politics, it's going to be hard to move them too far to the left, unless Citizens United is overturned. But I encourage them to run for office, to support local candidates. The more candidates that share Sanders' vision, that get elected at the local, the state, and even the national level, the more those candidates will be in the debates, the more their ideas will be heard, and ultimately, hopefully we can change our voting system so that we incorporate two things. One would be instant runoff voting, which is basically where you rank your candidates, say 1 through 4. So if I wanted Jill Stein, say, and my second choice was Hillary Clinton, and my third choice was anybody else, then my first vote would go to Stein. They'd basically throw all 4 candidates, because there are 4 candidates now, in the mix, and they would add up the votes, and then they would toss out the person who was in last place, and anyone that voted for that person, their votes would go to their second choice, and so on. And you keep cycling. So that way you wouldn't have to go into the voting booth and hold your nose and vote for the evil of 2 lessers.
That's in play in some states around the country already, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
But it's...
versions of it.
Yeah, I don't think much in the United States. In other countries it is, but they also have in other countries proportional representation. So if 10% of the population is Green Party and 10% is John Birch, then they would have 10% of the seats in the legislature.
Do you envision that we'll have more than 2 parties in this country, or 2 branches of the same party in America?
It's my hope that we would have a multitude of parties, because America is really home to so many different races and cultures and ideas and religions, and all those voices need to be heard, and they're really not in the current 2-party system that we have. We basically have someone...
You're saying 2-party again, and I'm suggesting that there's really 2 branches of the same party, the corporate party.
Oh, yeah, the demopoly, you could say, right. But this election is particularly concerning, because you've essentially got a sociopath running for office. This is the clinical diagnosis. These are the characteristics.
What about a narcissistic personality?
Well,
features also?
that of course too falls in there. But these are the characteristics of sociopaths: lack of empathy, cold, calculating nature, shallow emotions, narcissism, grandiose self-image, charming, which he is to many, high IQ, manipulative, secretive, sexually deviant, and we'll come back to that, hypersensitive to criticism, paranoid, despotic and authoritarian, lack of remorse, low tolerance for boredom, impulsive behavior, and compulsive lying.
You went through the whole DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and extracted some stuff from so many personality types.
I did, and I understand those who want Trump to be elected. I understand where they're coming from.
Do you?
I do, in part. Not all of them. I think there's a fraction of his voters that are that share his racism and misogyny, and have really horrific attitudes toward other cultures, towards other immigrants. But I think many of them are dissatisfied with what government has failed to do for them. It has failed to enact policies to lift people out of poverty, to provide sustainable jobs, to provide health insurance for all.
Why hasn't the government done any of those things to this date?
Well, we've got a do-nothing Congress, and because the government is beholden to special interests who want to maintain the status quo.
Well, they have the money to help those people running for. Never mind, I can't keep a straight face for that.
I know. But I have to come back to the whole issue of Trump and his acknowledgement on camera that he had committed sexual assault. This is very serious. As a physician and anyone who understands anything about law enforcement realizes this again, let's emphasize this. He acknowledged that he has committed sexual assault with more than one individual.
That's just locker room talk. What do you make?
It's not locker room talk. I've been in locker rooms, and yeah, there is some off-color remarks made in locker rooms.
But not to that extent.
But people do not come out and acknowledge that they have sexually assaulted other people. This is what you go to jail for. This is a person who, if elected, could have cops showing up at the White House and taking him to prison for potentially rape or other forms of sexual assault. And in the United States, every 15 seconds, a woman is beaten, and every 2 minutes, a woman is raped. And I'm trying to raise a daughter in a culture that respects women, that will hopefully one day offer them equal pay for equal work, rather than the 79 cents on the dollar that they earn, which is essentially what they were earning back in the late 1960s. I want her to grow up in a society that's different from the one we have today, where women do 2/3 of the world's work, earn just 10% of the world's income, and own just 1% of the world's property.
Why is that?
Because they've been socially, politically, educationally, and legally marginalized. And much of that has to do with a patriarchal society that we live in, but also a lot of it has to do with impaired access to education and to comprehensive reproductive health care. The longer a woman is able to delay childbearing and control her reproductive system as she chooses, the more education she will get, the more income she will ultimately learn, the more choice of jobs that she will have ultimately. So I'm trying to raise my daughter into a world that I hope will be like that. And so I'm particularly concerned by that. But there are many other things that concern me about him.
I was going to vote for Joe Stein, but I wonder if you'd be available to run in 4 or 12 years from now. I'm going to write you in.
I think I don't know. That's a question for another time.
Of course.
Yeah, my priorities are elsewhere right now.
Of course.
But I think people are dissatisfied. They're dissatisfied with the government that has done very little for them. And unfortunately, much of that anger has been taken out against others who are simply trying to get by and make a life for themselves, be they undocumented immigrants, refugees, and there's a vision that the United States was at some point a great country, and that somehow we become incredibly impotent and weak. But I think it bears looking at the history of the United States and the current situation in the United States to question ourselves and say, are we really a great country? And if not, what does it take for us to become a great country? Because we can. The ideals enshrined in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are remarkable. And you go to DC and you read the monuments and you think how incredible these ideals are. Now, of course, things at the time the Constitution was written and even today were not entirely fair to women, African Americans, many others. I mean, so entirely fair is a sort of understatement for the history of how this country has treated particularly African Americans, who basically built both of those monuments with slave labor. But it's possible for us to get there. So
how do we do that?
Well, what defines a great country? So let's look at the United States today. We have 15% of the population living in poverty. 22% of our children live in poverty. Poverty rates are double those for Caucasians in African Americans and Hispanics. We have 30 million Americans who don't have health insurance. We have many others that are partially insured, underinsured, that may do things like take their medicine every other day, skip one of their 3 medicines that they need because they can only afford 2 per month, go without needed health care because of lack of insurance. And the consequences of having that many people uninsured are such that 48,000 people die each year in this country for lack of health insurance. 48,000 people die. We present ourselves as global purveyors and spreaders of democracy, yet much of this is done behind the barrel of a gun. So the United States has a military budget that is equal to the next 10 nations combined. We're the largest arms exporter in the world. We currently have over 1,000 bases, military bases, including over 700 bases in 69 other countries. We're essentially occupying, sometimes with the country's consent, sometimes without.
Isn't that what makes America great?
I don't think so. If you look at every other country combined, Russia, China, everywhere else, they have bases between them, and they have 30 bases. We have over 700 throughout the world. If you were to just take 1 week, 3 weeks of the U.S. military budget, that's equivalent to what we spend on all health, education, and welfare programs for children each year.
So generally speaking, America is not currently a great country. If what you mean by great is where every citizen has some sort of respect and ability to take care of themselves and their families.
And we're not really the outland of opportunity. We have a horrible public education system that's ranked the lowest or next to lowest in the industrialized world.
You know any other countries that have a better system than the U.S.?
Educational?
Just across the board.
All of them do have better educational outcomes.
Would a great country, would that apply to some other countries more than it would apply to America, being a great country?
Finland is one, where teachers are highly respected, well paid. There's lots of teacher training that's ongoing, interaction between teachers. They have time set aside where they can actually share curricula, share ideas about students. It's very competitive to become a teacher in Finland. And so, granted, there's other problems with Finland. They're a very homogeneous society. But in terms of their educational system, they've done very well. In the United States, however, we've failed to do that. We also have we're ranked 24th in self-rated quality of life. So people are essentially not happy here. We have to ask why that is. And I think it's because of huge wealth disparities. In the United States, we have a situation where at present there are, and I want to get my numbers correct, 1% of the population owns 40% of the wealth.
Mm-hmm.
The other 1% of the population owns 40% of the wealth in the United States. And most people own next to nothing. Only half of Americans actually own stock. And yet when you listen to the business news, it's all about the stock market and what different corporations are doing and whether or not they're having success or not. And remember, corporations' reason for existence is to maximize shareholder profit, to internalize profits and externalize
such a big disparity between the two classes of people?
That disparity has grown
warfare,
too. In a sense it is. And people will say, oh, well, it's poor people that are inciting class warfare. No, we didn't start the class warfare. The disparity between rich and poor has grown dramatically over the last 30 or 40 years in the United States, and is at levels that we saw at the time of the Great Depression. So you can't have a stable society when you have so many people living in poverty, so many people dissatisfied with the government that really should be representing them. The government here in the United States is theoretically, at least, of the people, by the people, and for the people. So why are we...
I'm glad you said theoretically.
Why are we trashing the government? Why are we saying, I want to dismantle this agency or that agency? Why not say, this is our government, retake that government, and have it help the poor, have it help the uninsured, have it help provide good education.
And they're doing that in some other countries, in Europe and Finland and places like that. Why aren't we doing it here?
Many. It's truly a sick country, Dr. Don, when you recognize that the top 25 hedge fund managers make more between them than all kindergarten teachers in the United States. It's a sick country that rewards that kind of work at the expense of those who are responsible for teaching our children to become good citizens. Now, unfortunately, there's been a backlash against facts and a backlash against science, and there's a great degree of pseudoscience in the United States. Half of Americans don't believe in evolution and believe that humans and dinosaurs coexisted. And that's the fundamental theorem of biology. You can't understand biology without it.
Why is that, people having those kinds of convictions and beliefs?
I think part of it is
irrational.
Well, it is irrational. I think part of it is failure of our educational institutions to teach properly. I think part of it is the notion in the media that you have to present a fair and balanced, in air quotes, approach to scientific issues. So I'll give you an example. There was a wonderful study that was published in 2004 where they looked at all 700 articles over that period in the major scientific journals related to global warming. Not a single one of them expressed doubt as to the existence nor the cause, i.e. man-made, of global warming. Then they looked at all the articles in the 4 major newspapers, New York Times, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post, over the same period of time. It was a 10-year period. And they found that half of them expressed doubt as to the existence and the cause of global warming. Because those newspapers basically felt, well, we have to include, for those who may, for religious reasons, want to deny global warming, or for instance evolution or superstition, or an unwillingness to acknowledge our relatedness to other creatures and our obligation to be good to them. I'm sorry, I'm on a roll, but
because I'm wondering now, you said education, educated populace. It sounds like from what you're saying, if this percentage of people have these kinds of beliefs, these kinds of convictions, then they're not truly educated. So what is really education? Do we have an educational process? Is it just the curriculum or what goes on in schools? Or is a person having information about the reality of what's going on and what needs to be done to make things better?
Well, first of all, it's information and having facts.
Well,
so
you get it through the media? Do you get it through the media?
Well,
through Fox News?
Unfortunately, the media has consolidated dramatically. If you look back at 1983, there were 50 different companies that controlled the vast majority of U.S. media. Today, it's 5.
Yeah.
And many of them have an agenda, and the quality of journalism in the United States is abysmal today. The news programs, instead of providing any sort of cogent analysis of an issue, have talking heads who are paid by the right and the left to spew talking points and to not answer questions, to avoid questions. And journalists are afraid to really press people on the issues and get them to answer those questions. And they're particularly afraid of doing that with public officials because they know that if they put public officials on the spot, they're not going to be invited back for an interview. But there's some good investigative journalism going on today at places like ProPublica and elsewhere.
Apparently, it is not sufficient to overcome that huge segment of the population who believes the crazy stuff that Donald Trump is about.
Right.
So well, I'm talking about really educating people. How do we educate Americans so that they can look more rationally?
Right.
About
so
what's going on?
It's not just facts. As I think it was Tip O'Neill said, you can have your own opinion, but you can't have your own facts. So it's first providing the factual, scientific basis for what we do today. For instance, many people will be happy to use science when it comes to aviation science, when they get on an airplane or when they go into the operating room. They're happy to use the scientific advances that have been made in medicine over the last 100 years. But they don't want to acknowledge, or they don't understand, or they haven't been taught the scientific facts. But then you have to have an educational system where you challenge children to become co-learners. You challenge them to think about their values, about what the science means to them.
How about challenging them by example?
Well, that's true. You have to have exemplary teachers who are highly respected.
I'm talking about people that fellow humans they come in contact with, not just the teachers or the educational system.
Right. You have to have good mentoring too.
Yeah.
And so, but it's challenging them. And one thing I've found when I have given talks to teenagers is they have great BS detectors. And so one of the most successful campaigns in the public health sphere in terms of getting kids to stop smoking and to not initiate smoking is the Truth campaign with the body bags outside the building and so on, because they can tell when tobacco executives are lying to them. And I think getting students involved as co-learners, having them ask questions, having teaching be more of a dialogue, and challenging them to talk with their parents at home, to talk to each other, and to read more than the 10 minutes, I hate to say on average, which is what a teenager, and unfortunately, those between age 10 and age 40 in the United States read an average of 10 minutes per day.
Adults need to be able to relate to little people as they're growing up,
right.
In addition to, and even more important than the educational system, what's true and what's good and what's reasonable.
Right.
So I hear you keep talking about the educational system, and I'm talking about how we live as fellow human beings, being kind to each other and considerate of each other and all those kinds of things. That needs to be lived by adults so that it's a model for how little people should learn how to live with fellow humans. Now, I'm aware of the time it's slipping by, Martin. Now, you call me Dr. Don. Shall I call you Dr. Donohoe? Or
No. Martin is fine.
You can
No,
call me Don if you want to.
Okay. Yeah, it was a sign of respect, but no, Martin is fine, or hey you, which is what some people call me.
So can we stop and have a little break here, and then we're going to have a surprise guest, two of them coming in after the break time. Oh, Mr. E, Mr. Director, okay. Over, and we have our two special guests here. We have baby Maddie and Martin's mother, and say their names.
This is my mom, Annette, whom I spoke about earlier. This is my daughter, Madeline. You want to say hi? Maddie, okay, she likes Maddie too. Also, I call her Professor, or Bugs, or
There we go.
Hey, Madeline. Hey, I have a question for you. What do you know about Donald Trump?
He had tiny hands and tiny heart.
A tiny hands and a tiny heart.
Oh my God, where'd you learn that from?
Yeah. Are you happy? You're so funny. Did you bring Feezy with you tonight? No. You want to sing a song? You sang a great song in the car.
Okay.
Do you want to sing Itsy Bitsy Spider? I'll start.
Okay.
Itsy Bitsy. You sing.
Spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out.
Out came the sun.
And dried up all the rain, and the itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout again.
He just didn't learn. Okay, Chops. Thank you for coming on TV.
You betcha.
You're a television star.
Good to see you again.
Not that way. Grandma's going to take you out now. Thanks, Mom.
Is this way?
No, that way.
Coming with us?
I'm going to be done soon.
Okay.
Pretty soon,
Okay.
dear. Okay.
Play some more, okay?
And then we'll go home, okay?
She's so cute.
I know. Daddy will be done in a half hour.
All right, we covered a lot of stuff pretty soon, so we're going to have to go through kind of faster.
Sure.
The U.S. country, greatest country in the world today, was it ever the greatest country in the world?
Well, I don't think so. As
Greatest, that's kind of a hard...
Yeah, I think we've covered that. I would just add to that, we have 4.5% of the world's population and 50% of the world's wealth. We are responsible for 25% of its energy use, 33% of its paper consumption, and 72% of its hazardous waste. That's not fair, and that's not sustainable.
Doesn't that make us the greatest country in the world?
No, and certainly our military interventions have not. And speaking of the military budget, I just want to return to that for a moment. The world military budget is $1.8 trillion annually. Now, if you were just to take a quarter of that amount of money each year, you could provide water, sanitation, full education, child care, medical care for 1 year for everyone on the planet. You could eliminate AIDS, you could eliminate malaria, you could provide clean sources of energy for everyone. It's appalling, and it's a sign of a sick society that spends so much on weapons to kill other human beings.
Why is the society sick in America? Why is the society sick?
Well, I think it's part of this idea of American exceptionalism that we're so great. And I think part of that is simply the fact that we don't read much about other countries. We don't learn much about them in school. We don't visit other countries to see what other people are like. We're scared of other countries.
Does race have anything to do with it?
Oh, absolutely.
Worldwide or just in this country alone?
Both. Both. I think the whole discussion about immigration from Syria and from other areas of the Middle East is really appalling. The United States has taken such a tiny percentage of immigrants from even the countries that we invaded, Iraq and Afghanistan, and from Syria also, because of this tremendous fear of Muslims, when what you see in Islamic terrorism is a perversion of the Quran, is a perversion of Islam, and is not the way that the vast majority of Muslims feel, who are peace-loving people. And to look at the horrible suffering that faces the Syrian refugees and say, we don't want to accept those people like Canada has graciously done. How does that make us look in the rest of the world when at the same time our drones are bombing weddings?
Religion is not the reason that a whole segment of the population behaves toward fellow humans. It isn't just religion.
It's not religion. You're right. It is in part race. But we're supposed to be not only the land of the free, but the home of the brave. And the level of fear that drives people to Donald Trump, fear of terrorism, for instance, fear of the other, fear of black people, fear of Latinos, that they're going to take your job, when in fact undocumented immigrants, 80% of them are employed. They tend to be healthier than Americans because of the healthy migrant effect. They pay a number of taxes, from sales and property taxes and Medicare taxes and unemployment and so on, but yet they're eligible for none of those benefits, and they work in horrific jobs and work harder than the vast majority of Americans do in their jobs under unsafe, unsanitary conditions. To marginalize those individuals and to say we're scared of taking refugees from overseas because of the possible terrorist acts that they'll commit.
Is it because of race?
Yes, I do think in part. It's in part race, it's in part religion, it's part the color of their skin too, which is a sort of a subset of race. Mm-hmm. But if you really want to profile terrorists, who was responsible for the Atlanta Olympic bombing? Who was responsible for the Oklahoma Federal Building bombing? Who was the Unabomber? Who's responsible for most women's health clinic bombings and shootings? Mm-hmm. White, right-wing, Christian, evangelical males.
Yeah.
So perhaps that's a group we ought to be profiling too. But I think to marginalize and create this climate of fear around Islam in this country is actually going to turn away the very individuals who worked so hard to get here.
What about
and want to live safely, that could help tip us off?
Talking about race or racism, what about the police shootings and police killings of black people in America today? What's going on there?
Well, the criminal justice system is inherently biased and has been since the
I'm not talking about the justice system. I'm talking about killing fellow human beings.
I want to put that into some context too, because it's not just the killing of African Americans, but it's the fact that they are incarcerated for longer sentences for similar crimes. It's that they're much more likely to face the death penalty. A black individual killing a white individual is an order of magnitude more likely to face the death penalty than a white individual who kills a black individual. The sentencing guidelines for drugs are not fair. And certainly there are a number of police officers, in fact the vast majority of them, who want to create an environment in which we can all feel safe in our homes, on the streets. I've been a victim of a robbery and a mugging. I have fantastic respect for the vast majority of police individuals. Now, there are some bad ones, and there's a culture of racism in certain police departments, as we saw in Ferguson.
Certain police departments? Isn't that true in most police departments in every major city in the country?
I don't want to say every police department.
I'm not saying every. I'm saying a majority of them.
I would say there is a subset of individuals in probably a majority of police departments who harbor racist feelings. I think one of the problems that I've had in completely identifying with the movement about shootings is some of the major cases, and this is a topic for another show, have been cases where it was really questionable whether or not the shooting was justified. And so the problem is there are so many good cases where the shooting was entirely unjustified, but some of the ones that have received national attention are ones where there are still questions that have been raised by pathologists and investigators that are independent investigators, people with the FBI and so on, that have raised questions about the legality of it.
Certain policemen and law enforcement people are killing black people.
Yes.
What needs to be done about that, or should anything be done about it?
Oh, well, of course something should be done about it.
Well, yes.
Yeah, and I
You're
think
talking about the justice system and the whole system, and I'm talking about the bottom line. Black people are being
what do we need to do?
Killed.
More African American officers, more community policing, and
That's what I want to hear from you.
Community involvement in the police department.
Okay.
Better representation on police oversight boards. More vigorous prosecution of bad cops. Better training in race relations for police officers. There's a number of things that you can do, and it's the bottom line though is, frankly, I would much rather be a white guy in this country than a black guy, because the deck is stacked against you from the beginning. And if I'm a white man walking down a street wearing a hoodie, I'm much less likely to be accosted, to be shot if I reach for something, than an African American is. And that's not right.
So you mentioned the things that need to be done to have that turn around the other way, and have black people be shot by police at a different ratio than they are now. So there's something that can be done.
I really don't want anybody shot by a police officer unless the police officer's life or some other person's life is in imminent danger from that individual. I don't want to see anybody dying. So
let's go on. We're talking immigration.
I do want to speak to while we're on race, if I may, just for a moment.
Please.
Talking about having the deck stacked against you, there was a wonderful study from the American Journal of Public Health that looked at the lives that would have been saved between 1991 and 2000 if in the United States we were to simply have equalized black-white mortality ratios for all the major illnesses. And they found that 680,000 lives would have been saved. 680,000. Then they calculated through rigorous scientific methodology how many lives were saved by all medical advances during that decade. New pharmaceuticals, new methods of care, new surgical techniques. 177,000. So that's not to make light of the importance of medical research, but from a public health perspective, the bang for the buck, to probably use a bad metaphor, violence, is much greater if you're going to attack social causes. It's similar with education. Educational inequalities, if we had eliminated them in the United States over the same period, we would have saved 8 times as many lives as those medical advances.
Will that change if in November Hillary Clinton wins the presidential election?
Not immediately, no. I think it's going to require a Congress that's willing to do more. But really this has to start at the grassroots level. This has to start with people, particularly those who are inspired by Sanders and others, and particularly those who are inspired even by Trump, who are angry at the government, to retake the government and say, this is what we want. We want sustainable jobs. We don't want jobs that are going to disappear, like coal jobs. Those are going the way of the dinosaur. So rather than try to hang on to unhealthy, unsafe jobs where frankly the managers of those mines don't give a hoot whether or not people die in explosions because they've neglected to do safety checks. We need to provide job retraining for those individuals and transition them into better paying jobs that are more sustainable, that have health insurance, which really everyone should have, and create a whole different type of economy. But it's not going to be up to Hillary Clinton or the people in Congress. It's going to be up to the people in their local communities to channel their anger, no matter whom they're voting for, and channel their frustration as saying, I'm going to do something about this country, and I'm going to ally myself with those who are also doing the same thing I'm doing, like the undocumented immigrants. That is working hard to try to provide for my family and live where I want to live. And frankly, most undocumented immigrants do not want to live here, that come for the horrible jobs. They would much rather be home in Mexico or Guatemala or Honduras, where the rest of their families are.
All right, let's move on because you're running out of time here and we've got 11 minutes left. And trade policy, America's trade policy, that seems like it's important enough. Trans-Pacific Partnership, what do you think about that? TPP?
Yeah, I think all these trade agreements, NAFTA, CAFTA, TPP, are written in secret. The tribunals that hear cases before them basically have the ability not only to arbitrate in secret, but to overrule national laws and to force nations to do their bidding.
Well, why not? This is free enterprise, isn't it?
Well, it depends on what type of world you want. Do you want a corporate oligopoly where really today...
Isn't that what we have?
Well, we do. 150 corporations own or are responsible for 40% of the world's wealth. And they're the ones that really have the power. Well, and they're answerable to their shareholders.
It seems like there should be something that we should do about corporations and the power they have.
Well, I thoroughly agree. And there are a number of measures that can be taken at the legal level in terms of preventing them from hiding vast assets overseas and avoiding taxes.
Assets overseas. That sounds like one we should spend some time talking about. Assets overseas and assets. How about I guess FDR and his plans for America, and where people paid a huge amount of taxes so that they didn't use their money to buy politicians as readily as they do nowadays. Should we have some control over the amount of wealth that citizens should have?
Oh, I think that there should be a maximum income. I think that, say, $10 million, something like that. You can make it relatively generous.
That's income. What about wealth across the board?
I'm sorry, wealth. Yeah.
Okay.
Maximum wealth of $10 million. It's just not a sustainable world. I mean, if you look at planet Earth, as they did from the Voyager spacecraft, when they turned it around, as they passed through the rings of Saturn, and took a picture of that pale blue dot, you realize that really that's all we've got. We might send a few individuals to Mars to start a new colony someday, but for all of us otherwise, this is all we've got. And unless we figure out a way to have an equitable society that's democratic, but not based on capitalism, which is really the type of economy, so to speak, that rats and roaches live by. We need an economy that's fair for everybody, that's egalitarian, that still allows for some competition, because competition is good, but not for the type of cheating that goes on in the corporatocracy today. And not a kind of world where people can brag when they're running for the highest office in the land that not paying taxes was smart business.
Mm-hmm.
And not having someone running for office, since I'm back on him, who's willing to denigrate women, who speaks disparagingly of immigrants, of racial and ethnic minorities, who's a serial liar, who has no respect for science whatever. We have reached a state where we've lost respect in our democratic institutions, in government agencies, in scientific bodies, in journalists who are supposed to be looking out for the rest of us and keeping all those other branches of government on their toes. And we need to have a restoration of faith in those institutions of democracy. And unfortunately, the bloviator in chief of the Republican Party has created a hostile environment that is not conducive to that type of world that we want to live in. And it's my hope that he goes back to marketing his steaks and his hotels and pays his workers and doesn't stiff them as he's done in the past, and ideally just sort of disappear. He's got to raise Barron, and Barron needs all the help he can get, living in a gold-plated mansion at the top of a New York City skyscraper. So,
democracy versus capitalism, and I added versus something else. Democracy, capitalism, we're talking about socialism or capitalism. We're trying to put names on to the systems that we operate under, and there's all different shades of that are subsumed under those descriptors we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So would we have better an egalitarian socialism in America rather than the kind of system we have now?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you define socialism. Unfortunately, most isms tend towards the rule of a few elite. Look at communism. Look at many countries. It depends on the
kind of communism you're talking about too.
And it depends on the type of socialism. And I value societies that are democratic. If you're going to start from the bottom up, you have to have a democracy where everybody has the right to vote. You have to have a engaged citizenry that's a well-educated citizenry. And I focused on science earlier, but I would like to emphasize also the role of the humanities and the arts, the things that feed the soul, that help us to put science in perspective.
You got 2 or 3 minutes left.
All right. And I'd like to see a world where the U.S. really leads in the way it can. As one example, and then I'll stop with the facts. In foreign aid, everybody in the United States tends to think that we're very generous. If you ask the average American, and polls show this, they think that 24% of our gross domestic product goes out in foreign aid. The reality is that 0.2% is what we give in foreign aid. Much of that aid goes basically to benefit U.S. corporations that have subsidiaries overseas, even to pay American workers who are in other countries. So we're not as generous as we think we are. We might be number 1 in absolute dollars, but we're number 21 as a proportion of our GDP. So we need to set an example in the United States. We have to have an economy that's a participatory type of economy, or paracon, and you can look that up. It's a ground-up sort of economy that basically looks at the basic needs of citizens, how we can work together as a community to meet those needs, still have competition that's healthy competition that's not marked by cheating.
I think we know those things.
Okay.
It's just we are not living up to it or not doing those things. And the question is, why aren't we doing those things? Because of the tremendous gap in the wealth and the power of money and Citizens United.
And we've got to get that out.
Okay.
And kids, if I could say anything to the kids, read. Get your information not just from Facebook. By reading, I don't mean reading twit blogs or things on FaceSpace or InstaChat or whatever. I mean read novels. Get your news from multiple different sources to try to figure out who's telling you the truth and who isn't. Look at TV critically. Stop the program occasionally and say, what's this person's underlying agenda? Are they telling the truth? What are they trying to influence me to do? Is this in my best interest? Is this in the best interest of me 50 years from now? Would this be in the best interest of my children? Read, talk to each other, challenge your teachers, challenge your legislators. Go visit them, write to them, hound them. They work for you. You don't work for them. They work for you. Make them work for you. Make them give you the kind of world that you want.
Is that what you're teaching Maddie?
Oh, she's 3.
You started very, very early.
If I can teach her to not pitch a fit when I try to serve her broccoli, I'm happy. But in little ways, yes. In showing gratitude, we every night we sit down in bed and we say, let's think of one thing we want to be thankful for today.
You do?
Yeah. That's our part of our routine. And then we have reading time and staring time, and I sing a song.
Is it a religious routine that you have? Or?
It is somewhat. I have a complicated approach to religion, which is a topic for another program. It's a quasi-Christian, quasi-Unitarian interest in all faiths and respect for all faiths that work towards the good of humanity, but I have way more questions than I have answers, and they're not going to be answered in this life, and I hope there's another one that I'll get the answers in.
Another life, huh? Reincarnation? I'm going to come back as a Labrador Retriever. We're going to have to stop now because time is running out. We may have time for a public service announcement or two. And then I want to tell you about getting my shows on the web, on your computer. Don Baham YouTube. There's many, many shows and all sorts of guests. People know almost as nice as Martin here. And I want to also tell you about the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. Without the ACLU, our liberties would be down the tubes. What else I want to tell you about? End corporate personhood. Go to movetoamend.org and you learn how to learn that corporations are not persons and money is not speech. And the humanists and humanism, we want to tell you about that. That's a great organization I belong to. Go to the website americanhumanist.org and learn more about humanists and humanism. That's an alternative to organized religion as we know it. And what else can I tell you about? Thank you for watching. And remember KFC. KFC, not that KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too, and you too, and you too. Thanks again. See you next time. Good night.